I'm Heather Wilson, 28 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood my life story. Abandoned by my parents at 13, rescued by my wealthy Uncle Richard, who gave me everything: education, luxury, opportunity. When he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I was devastated. As I stood in his study holding the folder labeled Wilson Trust, my hands trembled. The document I'd just found wasn't just about my inheritance, it was proof that my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. Everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. Devastatingly wrong. Before I dive deeper into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this kind of family drama intrigues you, hit that like and subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers. My journey from abandoned child to heiress to detective, unraveling my own family secrets, is about to begin, and trust me, you won't believe where it ends. Rain pounded against the windows of our modest suburban home as my mother, Samantha, frantically stuffed clothes into a suitcase. I was 13, confused, watching my world collapse in real time. "We can't take her with us, Thomas. You know that," my mother whispered harshly to my father, unaware I could hear from the hallway. Richard made it very clear. "There has to be another way," my father argued, his voice breaking. "She's our daughter, and we're drowning in debt. The business is gone. The house is next. What kind of life can we give her now?" Mom's words were like daggers. "Richard can provide everything we can't." That night, I was loaded into my father's car with a single suitcase. The drive to Uncle Richard's estate took 2 hours, but felt like crossing into another world. When we pulled up to the wrought iron gates, my father's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Uncle Richard's mansion loomed against the evening sky, a modern castle of glass and stone. I'd only visited twice before in my life. My father had always seemed uncomfortable around his older brother, though I never understood why. Richard Wilson met us at the door himself, not bothering to shield himself from the rain. He was tall, imposing in an expensive suit despite the late hour. His face betrayed no emotion as my father explained the situation in hushed tones. "As we discussed," was all Richard said, his eyes flicking to me. My father knelt before me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Heather, you'll be staying with Uncle Richard for a while. Mom and I need to sort some things out." "When will you come back?" I asked, my voice small. The silence that followed was answer enough. Inside the mansion, I met Aunt Patricia, Richard's wife. Unlike her husband, her embrace was warm, though her eyes held something like pity. "You poor dear," she said, stroking my damp hair. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of you." I watched from an upstairs window as my father's car disappeared down the long driveway. I didn't know it then, but it would be 15 years before I saw him again. That first night in the mansion, I cried myself to sleep in a bedroom bigger than our entire living room at home. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the furniture antique, but all I wanted was my own bed, my own life. The next morning, Richard called me to his study, a cavernous room lined with books and dominated by a massive oak desk. He sat me down and explained my new reality with brutal efficiency. "Your parents cannot care for you anymore," he said, his voice matter of fact. "They've made some terrible financial decisions and have nothing left. But you're a Wilson, and I take care of family." He outlined my new life, the prestigious private school. I would attend, the expectations he had for my behavior and academic performance, the opportunities that would be available to me if I proved worthy. "You'll want for nothing material," he concluded, "as long as you remember that everything comes with expectations attached." Understood. I nodded, numb with shock and abandonment. "Good," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Then welcome home, Heather." As I walked out of his study, I caught a glimpse of a photograph on a side table, my father and Richard as young men standing in front of a building bearing the Wilson name. My father was smiling broadly. Richard's arm was around his shoulders. I couldn't reconcile that image with the cold man who sat behind the desk. or the father who had just left me behind. Avalon Preparatory Academy's stone buildings and manicured grounds felt more like a movie set than a school. As Uncle Richard's Mercedes pulled away on my first day, I clutched my designer backpack like a shield. At 13, wearing a uniform that cost more than my parents' monthly rent had been, I felt like an imposter. "Remember, you're a Wilson," Richard had said during the drive. "Conduct yourself accordingly." Those first months were a whirlwind of adaptation. Etiquette lessons from Aunt Patricia filled my weekends, which forked to use how to sit properly, the art of small talk with important people. My vocabulary expanded to include terms like portfolio diversification and charitable foundations. I learned that money wasn't just spent, but managed, invested, used as a tool. "Your uncle is grooming you," my etiquette instructor, Mrs. Foster, remarked once. "He sees potential in you." At home, Aunt Patricia became my lifeline. While Richard remained distant but demanding, Patricia would sit on my bed at night, asking about my day, offering gentle guidance. "Your uncle means well," she'd say, when his criticism reduced me to tears. "He just doesn't know how to show affection. He never has." By 15, I'd adapted well enough. My grades were excellent. I'd learned to navigate the social hierarchies of wealth, and I'd even made a few friends who didn't seem to care that I was essentially an orphan. That's when I met my cousin Megan for the first time. She'd been at boarding school in Switzerland when I arrived, but returned home for good during my second year with the Wilsons. Megan was everything. I wasn't naturally confident, sophisticated, secure in her position. At first, she seemed thrilled to have me there, showing me her favorite shops, introducing me to her friends, sharing secrets late into the night. "It's like having the sister I always wanted," she told her mother within my hearing, and I glowed with belonging. The change happened gradually. Small comments about my background, pointed questions about my parents in front of Richard's business associates, clothes borrowed and returned damaged. "Oh, was that expensive? I'm sorry. I forget you didn't grow up understanding how to care for nice things," she'd say innocently when called out. The real turning point came during my sophomore year. I'd been working for months on a special science project, a sophisticated environmental analysis that had genuine potential for the scholarship competition it was designed for. The night before the presentation, I was putting final touches on my digital slides when Megan brought me tea. "You look so stressed," she said, perching on my desk. "You should take a break." The next morning, I opened my project to find the file's corrupted weeks of data analysis gone. There was no time to recreate it. "These things happen," my teacher said sympathetically. "Technology isn't always reliable." But I knew. I'd seen the smirk on Megan's face when I frantically explained the situation. When Richard heard about my failure, his disappointment was palpable. "I expected better from you, Heather," he said over dinner. "Preparation prevents poor performance. You should have had backups." That night, I overheard him speaking to Patricia in his study. "The girl might have potential after all, despite this setback," he said. "She reminds me of Thomas before he lost his edge, sharp, determined. With proper guidance, she could be useful. Useful. Not loved, not valued for myself, useful." Yet even that cold assessment filled me with a desperate determination to prove myself. If excellence was the price of security, I would pay it. I started backing up my work obsessively after that, keeping copies in multiple locations. I watched Megan carefully learning to anticipate her sabotage. Most importantly, I redoubled my efforts to impress Uncle Richard to make myself indispensable. By 17, I'd secured my position as Richard's protégé. Megan's attempts to undermine me continued, but Richard had begun to see through them. The more she tried to discredit me, the more obvious her jealousy became. "Competitive spirit is admirable," Richard told me after Megan had particularly obviously tried to take credit for my work on a charity event. "But subtlety is the mark of true power. Remember that, Heather. It was the closest thing to praise I'd received from him, and I treasured it like a rare gem. Princeton University's historic campus sprawled before me as Uncle Richard's driver unloaded my luggage. At 18, I was finally experiencing a taste of freedom, though Richard's influence extended even here, his alma mater, where buildings bore the names of his associates and former classmates. "Don't disappoint me," he said, by way of farewell. "The Wilson name opens doors, but you must walk through them yourself." My dorm room was standard issue, a deliberate choice by Richard, who believed in building character through shared experience, though he'd ensured I had the right roommate. Jessica Campbell was nothing like I expected. The daughter of a history professor and a nurse, she was attending on scholarship and made no attempt to impress me when she learned my last name, Wilson. Like the volleyball, she joked, completely unaware of the weight my family name carried. Her ignorance was refreshing. For the first time since my parents left, I found myself forming a genuine friendship based on who I was, not what family I belonged to. "You're different around your Uncle, Jessica," observed after Richard's first campus visit. "Smaller somehow. Why do you let him control you like that?" I had no good answer. Control felt like stability after abandonment. Richard's approval meant security. He took me in when my parents dumped me. I defended. "I owe him everything." Jessica shook her head. "You don't owe anyone your identity, Heather." Her words stayed with me, planting the first seeds of independent thought. During sophomore year, cousin Megan began her campaign against me within the extended family. At Thanksgiving, I noticed relatives watching me with newfound suspicion. "I heard she's manipulating Richard to cut everyone else out of the will," I overheard Aunt Catherine telling her husband. "Megan says she's been working on him for years." By Christmas, the whispers had become blatant cold shoulders. Relatives who once greeted me warmly now offered tight smiles and quick exits from conversations. Megan's smug expression told me everything I needed to know. The accusations reached their peak during the Wilson family summer gathering. As I helped serve drinks by the pool, Megan loudly recounted how I'd accidentally broken Aunt Patricia's treasured crystal vase, a complete fabrication. "It's just Heather's background, I suppose," she said with fake sympathy. She never learned to appreciate valuable things. Before I could defend myself, Richard's voice cut through the murmurs. "That's enough, Megan," he said sharply. "The vase was broken by the housekeeper. Your lies reflect poorly on you, not Heather." The shock on Megan's face mirrored my own. Never had Richard so publicly defended me. Later that evening, he called me into his study. "Your academic performance has been exemplary," he said. "Your understanding of business principles is developing nicely. I believe you're ready for more responsibility." He outlined a special internship he'd created for me at Wilson Investments for the following summer, a position that would place me above many long-term employees, including Megan, who'd been working there since freshman year. "You have the potential to carry on what I've built," he said. "Something Megan lacks despite her advantages." His words filled me with conflicting emotions, pride at being chosen, unease at the growing rift with Megan, and a strange sense of being groomed for some larger purpose I didn't fully understand. That fall, Aunt Patricia's health began to deteriorate. Initially dismissed as fatigue, her symptoms grew concerning unexplained bruising, hair loss, chronic exhaustion. Doctors ran tests but found no definitive cause. During a rare moment alone with her while visiting for the weekend, Patricia gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Be careful, Heather," she whispered, her once bright eyes clouded with something like fear. "Not everything is as it seems in this family." When I pressed her to explain, she shook her head, retreating back into vague pleasantries. On my 21st birthday, Richard summoned me to his attorney's office in Manhattan. There, he announced he was updating his will to include me as a beneficiary. "You've proven your value," he said as we left the attorney's office. Continue on this path and your future will be secure in ways your parents could never have provided. The message was clear: loyalty would be rewarded, independence would not. As graduation approached, Richard's influence secured me interviews at prestigious firms, though I knew I was expected to join Wilson Investments. The golden handcuffs tightened even as Jessica urged me to consider other options. "You're brilliant, Heather. You could work anywhere, be anyone," she insisted. But the thought of disappointing Richard, of losing my place in the only family that had kept me, was paralyzing. The abandoned 13-year-old inside me couldn't risk being left behind again. So I smiled for photographs at graduation, accepted congratulations for my summa cum laude honors, and prepared to step into the role Richard had been crafting for me all along. The glass and steel headquarters of Wilson Investments towered above Manhattan's financial district, its top floors offering views that made the city look like a miniature model. At 23, I had my own corner office on the 38th floor, just 2 below Richard's executive suite. "Earned, not given," Richard told the board of directors during my introduction. "Heather's performance speaks for itself." It wasn't entirely true. While my credentials were impeccable, Princeton degree summer internships, financial certifications completed in record time, my rapid rise past people with decades more experience was clearly orchestrated by Richard. The whispers followed me through hallways and fell silent when I entered conference rooms. "Nepotism with a designer wardrobe," one vice president muttered, not quite out of earshot. I worked twice as hard to prove them wrong, arriving before dawn, leaving well after dark, mastering complex financial models and client portfolios. Success became my armor against resentment. 6 months in, I met Brian Donovan, a junior partner who'd built his reputation through merit rather than connections. Unlike others, he judged my work, not my last name. "This analysis is brilliant," he said, reviewing my proposal for restructuring an underperforming division. Richard's favoritism aside, "You've got real talent." His honesty was refreshing. Coffee to discuss market trends became lunch debates about investment strategies, which evolved into dinner conversations that stretched far beyond business. "You're nothing like I expected," Brian admitted after we'd been seeing each other for 3 months. "When Richard announced you were joining the firm, everyone assumed you'd be entitled, coasting on family connections." "And what do you think now?" I asked. "I think you're running from something," he said quietly, "and towards something else that might not be worth catching." Before I could process his insight, tragedy struck. Aunt Patricia, whose health had been declining for nearly 2 years, died suddenly in her sleep. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but the speed of her decline had always seemed unnatural. The funeral was a study in performative grief. Richard, stoic and commanding in his bespoke black suit, accepted condolences like a politician at a campaign stop. Megan, by contrast, was genuinely devastated, her body racked with sobs throughout the service. At the reception afterward, Megan cornered me in the kitchen of the family home. "You stole her from me," she hissed, grief transforming to rage. "She was my mother, but these last years, all she talked about was you, how proud she was of you, how worried she was for you. Megan, I never meant to—" "Save it," she snapped. "You've taken everything else. At least let me mourn my mother in peace." Her pain seemed genuine, making me question my own role in the family dynamic Richard had created. After Patricia's death, Richard became even more controlling. He questioned my weekend plans, had his assistant check when I arrived at and left the office, and began insisting I accompany him to business functions that had previously been optional. "We present as a united front now," he explained. Patricia understood the importance of family image. It was during one such function, a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum, that the first significant crack appeared in the foundation of lies Richard had built. An elderly woman approached us, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "My goodness," she gasped, touching my arm. "You're Thomas's daughter, aren't you? The resemblance is remarkable," Richard smoothly intercepted. "Mrs. Abernathy, how lovely to see you. I don't believe you've met my niece Heather." "Yes, Thomas's girl," she persisted. "How is your father? Such a brilliant man, such a shame about the—" "Thomas and his wife relocated years ago," Richard interrupted firmly. "A fresh start after the business setbacks. Heather rarely hears from them." The woman looked confused. "But I thought, if you'll excuse us," Richard said, steering me away with a grip that would leave bruises on my arm. Later that night, I found myself searching through old family albums stored in the library of Richard's penthouse. Photos of my father were suspiciously sparse, and those that existed showed him progressively being pushed to the edges of family groupings. Richard always central. In one of the oldest albums, I found a newspaper clipping announcing Wilson Brothers' launch investment firm. The photograph showed my father and Richard standing as equals before a building bearing both their names. When had my father been erased from the company history, and why? The next morning, I casually mentioned the encounter with Mrs. Abernathy to Richard over breakfast. His reaction was explosive. "Don't waste time digging up ancient history," he snapped, slamming down his coffee cup. "Your parents made their choice to abandon their responsibilities to the business and to you. I gave you everything they couldn't or wouldn't provide. Remember where your loyalties should lie." His threat was thinly veiled, continue questioning, and everything could be taken away. That night, I called Jessica, now in medical school across the country. "I think there's something wrong with the story I've been told about my parents," I said after explaining the incident. "You're just realizing this now?" she asked incredulously. "Heather, no parents just abandon a child to a brother they barely speak to without a compelling reason. Richard has been controlling your narrative since you were 13. But why would he lie? He's given me everything. Has he? Or has he given you the version of everything he wants you to have? Maybe it's time you found out what really happened 15 years ago." The seed of doubt planted long ago began to sprout roots I could no longer ignore. The private investigator's office was deliberately nondescript, the kind of place you could walk by 100 times and never notice. At 26, with my own substantial income and a growing sense of unease, I'd finally gathered the courage to seek answers independently. Maxwell Green had come highly recommended, a former police detective who specialized in long cold cases and had a reputation for discretion. "Let me understand," he said, reviewing the notes he'd taken during our conversation. "You want me to locate your parents, Thomas and Samantha Wilson, who supposedly abandoned you 13 years ago, but you now suspect there might be more to the story." "Yes. And I need absolute confidentiality. My uncle can't know I'm looking." Maxwell's weathered face revealed nothing. "Miss Wilson, in my experience, wealthy families rarely appreciate outsiders uncovering their secrets. Are you prepared for what I might find?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. For 2 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Richard's trusted lieutenant at Wilson Investments, participating in board meetings and client presentations. By night, I pored over Maxwell's reports, piecing together fragments of a shattered history. The first breakthrough came through property records. My parents hadn't simply disappeared, they'd relocated to a small town in Oregon, living modestly, but not in poverty as Richard had implied. Both had steady jobs, my father as an accountant at a local community college, my mother as an administrative assistant at a medical practice. Most shockingly, they'd made repeated attempts to contact me during my first years with Richard. Maxwell uncovered a series of court filings, motions for visitation rights, petitions for custody hearings, all mysteriously dismissed or delayed until they eventually stopped. "There's something else," Maxwell said during one of our clandestine meetings in a quiet corner of Central Park. "Your parents didn't go bankrupt naturally. The business collapse that Richard attributed to your father's poor management Financial records suggest systematic sabotage loans called in simultaneously investors, withdrawing without explanation, suppliers canceling contracts. Are you saying Richard deliberately destroyed my father's business? The possibility was almost too enormous to comprehend. I'm saying the coincidences strain credibility, Maxwell replied cautiously. But I need more time to gather conclusive evidence. Time ran out 3 weeks later when Lauren Richards' executive assistant cornered me in the ladies' room at the office. He knows, she said, simply reapplying her lipstick with steady hands. Richard knows you've been investigating your parents. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. How? Lauren's smile was cold. I've worked for your uncle for 15 years, Heather. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the private investigator's number in your call log when I borrowed your phone last month? Or the browser history you forgot to clear on your laptop during the Chicago trip? You've been spying on me. I've been protecting Richard's interests, which until recently seemed to include you. She snapped her compact shut. The board meeting tomorrow was supposed to announce your promotion to senior vice president. I'd start updating your resume instead. The threat materialized with brutal efficiency. By the next morning, rumors of my disloyalty and unprofessional conduct had spread throughout the firm. Colleagues who'd been friendly the day before now avoided eye contact. My access to certain financial systems was mysteriously revoked. Richard summoned me to his office at noon, his face a mask of controlled fury. After everything I've done for you, he said, voice dangerously quiet, this is how you repay my generosity. I just wanted the truth about my parents, I replied, struggling to maintain composure. The truth? Richard laughed, the sound utterly devoid of humor. The truth is, they were weak. Your father lacked the spine for real business. When things got difficult, they ran from their responsibilities, from their debts, from you. I salvaged what I could, including you. And this is my thanks. If that's true, then why did they file for custody? Why try to contact me for years? Something flickered in Richard's eyes, surprise that I knew this detail, quickly masked by renewed anger. Guilt, nothing more. They wanted to ease their consciences without making actual sacrifices. He leaned forward. Make no mistake, Heather. Continue down this path, and everything you have, your position, your reputation, your future, disappears. Is satisfying your curiosity worth losing everything? The threat hung between us, explicit and final. That evening, as I contemplated resignation letters and exit strategies, Brian appeared at my apartment door. I heard what happened, he said, stepping inside. The whole firm is buzzing about your supposed betrayal. Richards made his position clear. I'm done. Brian shook his head. You don't understand. This reaction, it's disproportionate even for Richard. Whatever you've found, it terrifies him. You could lose your job just by being here, I warned. Some things matter more than career advancement. His eyes held mine. I've never trusted Richard. The way he speaks about your father, there's old hatred there, not just disappointment. I want to help you find the truth. With Brian's support, I continued the investigation covertly. His position gave him access to historical company records I couldn't reach. Together with Maxwell's findings, a disturbing picture emerged. Late one night, in Maxwell's cluttered office, he laid out the most damning evidence yet: bank transfers, showing Richard had paid my parents to leave substantial sums, deposited to offshore accounts, coinciding exactly with my arrival at his home. There's more, Maxwell said gravely. I found these in sealed court records. He pushed forward copies of non-disclosure agreements bearing my parents' signatures. They were legally prohibited from contacting you or discussing certain aspects of Wilson Investments with anyone. He bought me, I whispered, nausea rising. Richard literally purchased me from my parents. Not exactly, Maxwell corrected. Based on these documents and the timeline, it appears your parents were coerced. Richard threatened them with criminal charges for financial irregularities he himself had orchestrated. The choice was prison or signing you over to his guardianship. But the most heartbreaking discovery came last. A box of returned letters my parents had written me over the years. Dozens of them, each marked return to sender in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Birthday cards, Christmas greetings, updates on their lives, all expressing love and desperate hope I might someday understand. They hadn't abandoned me. They'd been torn from me. As I read their words by the dim light of Maxwell's desk lamp, 13 years of misdirected anger and hurt collapsed into grief for the relationship Richard had stolen from us all. The Wilson Investments financial archives occupied a climate-controlled room in the company's sub-basement, a paper fortress of corporate history dating back to the firm's founding. As acting head of compliance, Brian had legitimate access, allowing us to search without raising alarms. "We have maybe 2 hours before security does their rounds," he said, unlocking the heavy door with his keycard. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Anything from the founding period," I replied. Incorporation documents, original investment structures, partnership agreements between Richard and my father. Working methodically through storage boxes, we uncovered the firm's origin story, one dramatically different from the narrative Richard had cultivated over the years. Wilson Investments hadn't been Richard's brainchild, as company literature claimed. The original business plan was in my father's handwriting. The seed capital had come largely from my maternal grandfather, and the early client relationships that formed the company's foundation had been my father's connections. Most significantly, the ownership structure was initially equal 50% each to the Wilson brothers. Yet, somehow over time, my father's stake had diminished while Richard's grew until Thomas Wilson disappeared from company records entirely. "Look at this," Brian said, passing me a faded document. "Amendment to Articles of Incorporation dated 20 years ago. Your father's signature transferring 30 percentage points of ownership to Richard." The signature looked wrong, slightly misaligned pressure points, inconsistent with other examples of my father's handwriting we'd found. "I think it's forged," I whispered. Richard stole the company piece by piece. Deeper in the archives, we found evidence of systematic financial manipulation accounts where funds had been temporarily diverted, client investments that had been misrepresented, tax structures that skirted legality. "Richard used these irregularities to blackmail your father, Brian," concluded, as we hurriedly replaced the files before security arrived. "He created the problems, then threatened to report your father for them unless he gave up control. But why take me? Why separate me from my parents entirely?" That question was answered the following day when Megan unexpectedly appeared at my apartment door. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room. Her usual polished appearance had given way to something: frantic hair, uncombed clothes, wrinkled eyes, red-rimmed. "About what?" I asked warily. "About what you've been finding in your little investigation." She poured herself a drink from my bar cart without asking. "Richard knows everything, Heather. He's always known everything. Did you think you were being clever with your private investigator? And your secret meetings with Brian?" Ice settled in my stomach. "How long have you known about my parents?" "All of it. Since the beginning." Megan laughed bitterly. "Do you think I enjoyed watching you waltz in and become the daughter he always wanted? You were supposed to be temporary leverage, not his heir apparent. Leverage. Against your father. Uncle Thomas was going to expose Richard's creative accounting to the SEC. Richard needed insurance, you." She drained her glass. "If Thomas went public, you'd suffer the consequences. The perfect shield. But my parents signed over their parental rights. They left after Richard convinced them you'd be better off with his resources than with them in prison. Very noble sacrifice on their part." Her tone was mocking, but then something unexpected happened. "Richard actually grew attached to. You saw potential he never saw in me. The revelation staggered me. Why are you telling me this now? Because he's destroying evidence. Whatever you and Brian found, it's probably gone by tomorrow. And if you persist, other things will disappear too. She set down her glass with deliberate care, like those parents you're so eager to reunite with. Or your boyfriend with the hero complex. The threat was unmistakable. Are you here to warn me or threaten me, Megan? Both. She moved toward the door. I've lived my entire life trying to win my father's approval. You managed it in less than a decade. If you're smart, you'll stop digging and enjoy the spoils. After she left, I called Brian, immediately warning him about Richard's knowledge of our investigation and the potential danger to my parents. We need to secure whatever evidence we have, he insisted. And you need to be careful. If Richard is desperate enough to threaten your parents after all this time, he's dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing through years of manipulation and lies. The luxury I'd enjoyed, the opportunities I'd been given, all of it built on stolen wealth and fraudulent foundations. My entire identity had been shaped by Richard's grand deception. The next morning brought news that shook the fragile structure of my new understanding. Stephen Caldwell, a retired lawyer who had served as general counsel during Wilson Investments' early years, reached out through Maxwell. He'd heard of my investigation and had documentation he claimed would fill in the final pieces. We met in a quiet diner in Queens, far from the financial district's watchful eyes. Stephen, now in his 70s, brought a weathered leather briefcase containing what he called his insurance policy. I knew this day would come eventually, he said, spreading original documents across the table. I kept copies of everything when I left the firm. Richard thought he'd destroyed all evidence of the original ownership structure, but I couldn't be party to that level of fraud. The documents confirmed our worst suspicions and revealed new horrors. The Wilson family fortune, the vast wealth that had funded my education, my lifestyle, and Richard's philanthropic image, had originally belonged almost entirely to my father. Thomas was the financial genius, Stephen explained. He grew their grandfather's modest savings into significant wealth through legitimate investments. Richard was always more focused on appearances than actual business acumen. Through forged documents, manipulated accounts, and finally outright blackmail, Richard had orchestrated my father's financial destruction and seized control of assets that should have been my inheritance all along. But why didn't my father fight back? I asked, struggling to comprehend the scale of the betrayal. Why accept defeat so completely? Stephen's expression softened. Because of you, Miss Wilson. Richard made it abundantly clear that if your father pursued any legal remedy, you would suffer either through public scandal that would follow you for life or more direct means. Your safety was the price of their silence. The revelation crushed something fundamental within me. The childhood I should have had, the relationship with my parents that should have flourished, the inheritance that was rightfully mine, all sacrificed to Richard's insatiable greed and ego. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of Richard's crimes, the final devastating revelation came through a phone call from Maxwell. I found medical records for your Aunt Patricia, he said, without preamble. The symptoms she exhibited for years before her death, they're consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. Are you saying Richard murdered his wife? I'm saying her decline wasn't natural, and the timeline coincides with her private meetings with several attorneys specializing in divorce and whistleblower protection. Patricia had discovered something, perhaps the same truths I was uncovering, and had paid the ultimate price for that knowledge. As I hung up the phone, a text message appeared from Richard's number. We need to talk. I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer. 6 months, maybe less. Come to the house tomorrow. It's time to discuss your future as my successor. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Somehow, Richard knew just how close I was to the truth, and he was making his final move in our deadly chess match. Richard's Central Park West penthouse felt different as I stepped off the private elevator, colder somehow, its opulence now tainted by knowledge of its true origins. The man who greeted me looked diminished, his tailored suit hanging slightly loose on a frame that had lost weight rapidly. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading me to his study. Medical equipment now occupied one corner. An oxygen tank monitors a small table covered with prescription bottles. The props of his latest performance. "Is it pancreatic cancer?" I asked, noting the specific medications. "Stage 4. Metastasized to the liver." He settled into his leather chair with a grimace of pain that seemed genuine. The irony isn't lost on me. All this power, all this wealth, and I can't buy more time. I'm sorry to hear that I said the words automatic divorced from genuine feeling. "Are you—" His eyes sharp as ever studied my face. "I wonder, given your recent activities." My pulse quickened, but I maintained a neutral expression. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Let's not play games, Heather. Your private investigator isn't as discreet as you might hope. Your meetings with Stephen Caldwell haven't gone unnoticed." He waved a hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter now, doesn't it?" "No. Because despite your little rebellion, you're still the best choice to carry my legacy forward." Richard leaned forward. "Whatever you think you've discovered about the past, the reality is simple. You and I are alike. You've thrived in the world I created for you. You understand what it takes to win. By destroying others, by stealing what isn't yours, by recognizing opportunity and having the courage to seize it." He coughed, reaching for a glass of water. "Your father lacked that courage. He was weak, paralyzed by conventional morality, by what others might think. I freed us both from his limitations. You stole his company, his wealth, his daughter." My voice remained steady despite the rage building inside me. "You systematically destroyed his life." Richard smiled thinly. "And built you a better one. Look at who you've become under my guidance. Brilliant, respected, positioned to control one of the most influential investment firms in the country. Would you have achieved that living in suburban mediocrity with Thomas and Samantha?" The worst part was that I couldn't immediately dismiss his argument. The opportunities I'd been given, the doors opened by the Wilson name, and Richard's connections, would my life have followed the same trajectory without them? "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Full transparency. I'll answer any question you have about the past, the complete truth. In exchange, you take control of Wilson Investments upon my death, protect our family interests, and continue the legacy I've built." He reached for a folder on his desk, "including managing certain arrangements that must remain private." The folder contained documents outlining a succession plan that would make me CEO of Wilson Investments and trustee of Richard's personal fortune over $2 billion in assets. The power being offered was breathtaking. "And if I refuse, then everything burns." His voice hardened. "The evidence you've gathered works both ways, Heather. Release it, and yes, my reputation is destroyed posthumously when I'll be beyond caring. But Wilson Investments collapses as well. Thousands of employees lose their livelihoods. Charitable foundations lose their funding. And you'll be known forever as the whistleblower who destroyed her own family out of petty revenge." The manipulation was masterful, offering unlimited power while threatening total destruction of everything and everyone I cared about if I refused. "I need time to think," I said, finally. "Of course." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family dinner tomorrow night. You can give me your answer then. Megan will be there. She deserves to hear your decision as well." Outside, in the sanctuary of a taxi heading downtown, I called Brian. "He's offered me everything I explained. Control of the company, his personal fortune, all of it, in exchange for burying the truth." "It's a trap," Brian replied immediately. Once you're complicit in covering up his crimes, he owns you forever, terminal illness or not. I know, but refusing outright is dangerous too. He still has leverage over my parents. That night, Brian Maxwell and Stephen gathered in my apartment to formulate a plan. If I appeared to accept Richard's offer, I could gain access to additional evidence while positioning myself to protect my parents and eventually make things right. It's dangerous, Maxwell warned. Men like Richard don't surrender control easily, even when dying. I need concrete evidence that will stand up in court, I insisted. And I need to find my parents before Richard can reach them. I've located them, Maxwell said quietly. They're living in Portland now. Small house, modest neighborhood. Your father teaches accounting at a community college. Your mother works as an office manager at a medical practice. The knowledge that they were real, living normal lives just across the country brought tears to my eyes. Don't contact them yet, Stephen advised. If Richard suspects you're planning to reunite, they become targets. Let him believe you're accepting his offer first. The next evening, I returned to Richard's penthouse for the family dinner. Megan was already there, her expression unreadable as Richard outlined his succession plan. Heather will assume control of Wilson Investments, he announced. Megan will retain her current directorship and receive a substantial trust. Together, you'll protect the family interests. How generous, Megan said, voice dripping with sarcasm. And what about your brother's family? The people you destroyed to build all this? Richard's expression darkened. That matter is closed. Is it Megan challenged surprising me with her sudden defiance? Because I've spent my entire life watching you systematically erase Uncle Thomas from our family history. I've spent 15 years competing with my cousin for your approval, only to discover you stole everything from her family in the first place. Careful, Megan Richard warned. No, I'm done being careful. She turned to me. Do you know why I hated you all these years? Because he never looked at me the way he looked at you, like I might actually be worthy of the Wilson name. I was just the necessary heir, the biological daughter he was obligated to care for. You were the protege he chose. The raw pain in her voice was unmistakable. Everything I did, the sabotage, the rumors, it was all to make him see me. And none of it worked. She laughed bitterly. And the supreme irony, you don't even want what I've spent my life trying to earn. Richard slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. Actually, I said calmly I'd like to hear more. What else have you been hiding, Megan? Her eyes locked with mine, some unspoken communication passing between us. Ask him about Aunt Patricia's special tea, she said quietly. Ask him why she started getting sick right after she met with divorce lawyers. Richard's face drained of color. You knew, I whispered to Megan. I suspected. I found the arsenic in his private safe last year, medicinal grade, nearly untraceable in small doses. When I confronted him, he convinced me I was being paranoid. Her hands trembled. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Richard rose slowly, rage contorting his features. You ungrateful little fools. Everything I built, everything I sacrificed, it was for this family's legacy. No, I replied, standing to face him. It was for your ego. Nothing more. So this is your answer, betrayal. I'll take control of Wilson Investments as you've offered, I said carefully. But on my terms. The truth about the company's founding will be acknowledged. My parents will be contacted and compensated for what was stolen from them. And you will confess to whatever happened to Aunt Patricia. His laugh was chilling. You think it's that simple, that you can dictate terms to me in my own home? I think your legacy is the only thing that matters to you. Right now, I'm offering you a chance to shape how history remembers Richard Wilson. His eyes narrowed, calculating as always. We'll discuss specifics tomorrow. At the company gala, I intend to announce you as my successor publicly. As I left the penthouse, Megan followed me to the elevator. He's planning something, she warned. He'll never agree to your terms. I know, I replied. That's why I came wired. I showed her the tiny recording device Stephen had provided. Every word of tonight's conversation has been captured, including his reaction to the arsenic accusation. Megan's eyes widened. He'll destroy you if he finds out. That's why I need your help. For once, we need to be family, real family. After a long moment, she nodded. What do you need me to do? The Wilson Investments Charitable Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, with politicians, celebrities, and financial elite gathered in the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dindor. Richard had chosen this public venue, deliberately a stage where he could control the narrative of his succession, while ensuring I couldn't refuse without causing a scene. What he didn't know was that Brian had spent the day gathering evidence from Richard's private safe using the combination Megan had provided. That Stephen had filed preliminary legal motions based on the documents we'd already secured. That Maxwell had flown to Portland to ensure my parents' safety. As Richard rose to make his announcement resplendent in formal wear that disguised his illness, I took my place beside him, the perfect, dutiful niece preparing to accept her inheritance. But the carefully orchestrated performance was about to become something else entirely. The Temple of Dindor gleamed under strategic lighting ancient Egyptian stone, creating a dramatic backdrop for Richard's final public performance. 500 of New York's elite applauded as he approached the podium, his illness carefully concealed by an expertly tailored tuxedo and professional makeup. Tonight marks a transition. Richard began, his voice strong despite his weakened state. For 30 years, I've had the privilege of building Wilson Investments into a force for financial innovation and philanthropic impact. Now the time has come to ensure that legacy continues under leadership worthy of the Wilson name. His gaze found me in the front row, expectation and warning mingled in equal measure. My niece Heather Wilson represents everything our family stands for: intelligence, determination, and unwavering commitment to excellence. It gives me great pleasure to announce her as my successor, effective immediately. Applause erupted as Richard beckoned me to join him on stage. The spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp as I took my place beside him. "Thank you, Uncle Richard," I said into the microphone, the rehearsed speech ready on my lips. But instead of delivering the expected, gracious acceptance, I turned to face him directly. "Before I accept this honor, there's something we need to address privately. Now." Confusion flickered across his face, quickly replaced by controlled anger. "This isn't the time," he murmured through a fixed smile. "It's exactly the time," I replied quietly. "Your study. 5 minutes. Or I make a different kind of announcement altogether." To the audience, our exchange appeared like an emotional moment between uncle and niece. Only Richard understood the ultimatum being delivered. With practiced charm, he turned to the crowd. "My niece reminds me we have some family matters to finalize. Please enjoy the reception. We'll rejoin you shortly." The museum director's office had been set aside for Richard's use during the event. As the door closed behind us, his facade crumbled rage, replacing the benevolent mentor persona. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed. Changing the terms of our agreement, I replied, removing a thick folder from my clutch. "This contains everything, Richard. Original incorporation documents proving my father's ownership, bank records showing systematic theft, evidence of the forged signatures. And this," I placed a small recorder on the desk between us, "contains your reaction when Megan mentioned Patricia's poisoning last night." The blood drained from his face. "You recorded our private conversation, just as you've recorded mine over the years. Lauren was quite helpful explaining your surveillance systems after I threatened to expose her role in your financial improprieties." Richard sank into a chair, suddenly looking every bit the terminally ill man he claimed to be. "What do you want? A full confession. Now, documented and witnessed. Or what?" You'll destroy the company, ruin your own future, if necessary. The door opened, and Brian entered with Stephen Caldwell. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "Witnesses," I explained, "to ensure whatever happens in this room is properly documented." Richard's laugh held no humor. "You think I'll simply confess to whatever accusations you've manufactured, based on what some old documents that can be explained away as administrative errors, a recording that proves nothing except family discord. Based on this." I placed another document before him, a formal letter on Wilson Investments letterhead. He scanned the contents, his expression transforming from disdain to shock. "Where did you get this?" "Your private safe. The combination hasn't changed since Patricia's birthday." I nodded toward Megan, who had silently entered the room behind the others. Your daughter remembered. The letter was Richard's insurance policy against my father, a detailed accounting of how he had systematically destroyed his brother's reputation, manipulated financial records, and orchestrated the takeover of what should have been a shared family legacy. It included explicit threats against me should my parents ever seek justice. "This document alone is enough to trigger multiple federal investigations," Stephen said. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, blackmail. And that's before we address Mrs. Wilson's suspicious death." Richard's eyes darted between us, the practiced control slipping to reveal naked panic. "You can't prove anything regarding Patricia." "Perhaps not conclusively," I agreed. "But the arsenic found in your safe combined with her medical records showing classic symptoms of poisoning creates enough suspicion for exhumation and toxicology testing." "I took photographs," Megan added quietly, "of the arsenic vials and Patricia's medication. They match." Richard stared at his daughter, betrayal and disbelief warring in his expression. "You too. You killed my mother," she said simply. "When she discovered what you'd done to Uncle Thomas and Aunt Samantha." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, with startling suddenness, Richard lunged toward the desk, grabbing for the evidence folder. Brian intercepted him, but in the struggle, Richard knocked over a lamp, sending it crashing to the floor. "You ungrateful bitch," Richard snarled, his composure completely shattered. "I gave you everything. I made you who you are." "No," I countered. "You stole everything that should have been mine, then parceled it back to me as if it were yours to give. You didn't make me, you tried to remake me in your image." Security guards, alerted by the noise, burst through the door. Richard seized the moment of confusion to make a final desperate move, lunging for me, his hands reaching for my throat. The attack never landed. Richard collapsed mid-lunge, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. The terminal cancer he'd used as leverage in our negotiations proved timely in its intervention. "Call an ambulance," Brian shouted as security radioed for medical assistance. As paramedics worked over Richard's prone form, Stephen pulled me aside. "This changes nothing legally. The evidence stands regardless of his condition." Richard was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, where doctors confirmed he'd suffered a massive heart attack likely triggered by the confrontation. His prognosis was grim days at most, given his already compromised health. The gala dissolved into chaos after our abrupt departure, with Megan making a brief announcement about a medical emergency before the event was officially concluded. By morning, speculation about Richard Wilson's health and the company's future dominated financial news. While Richard clung to life in intensive care, I initiated the next phase of our plan. With Stephen's guidance, I filed for emergency injunctions preventing any destruction of records at Wilson Investments. Brian secured the company servers. Maxwell continued his protection of my parents in Portland. 2 days after the confrontation, Richard regained consciousness briefly. To everyone's surprise, he asked to see me alone. The hospital room's monitoring equipment created a rhythmic backdrop to our final conversation. Richard, once so commanding, now lay tethered to machines, his power reduced to the weak grip he maintained on my hand, when I approached his bedside. "You won," he whispered hoarsely. "This wasn't about winning," I replied. His laugh triggered a coughing fit that took minutes to subside. "Everything is about winning, Heather. I taught you that. You taught me how to take. I've had to teach myself how to give." Richard's eyes, still sharp despite his failing body, studied my face. "They'll find nothing conclusive about Patricia." The dosage was too carefully calibrated. The confession, so casually delivered, still managed to shock me. Why she loved you. She was going to expose everything. After 30 years of complicity, her conscience suddenly awakened. His breathing grew more labored. She'd contacted Thomas, was planning to help him reclaim his share. "So you killed her." I protected what I built. His grip on my hand tightened slightly. "One last deal. Let me die without public disgrace. In return, you get everything: the company, the fortune, clean and clear. No legal battles, no protracted investigations. And the truth about my parents, about what you did to them. Acknowledge an administrative error. Restore their ownership percentage posthumously. Financial compensation, but no criminal implications." His eyes closed briefly, gathering strength. "My legacy remains intact. Your inheritance remains untainted. Everyone wins." The manipulator to the end, offering one final transaction. "No deal," I said quietly, withdrawing my hand from his. "I've already contacted the authorities. The full investigation begins tomorrow." Rage flickered across his features, followed by something that might have been respect. "You are a Wilson after all." They were the last words Richard ever spoke to me. He slipped into a coma that evening and died before dawn. The Portland afternoon carried a gentle mist as Maxwell drove me from the airport to my parents' address. After 15 years of separation, manufactured by Richard's manipulation, the final miles seemed both endless and too brief. "They're expecting you," Maxwell said, breaking our companionable silence. I explained the basics: Richard's deception, your discovery of the truth, his death. But there's only so much preparation possible for a moment like this. The house was modest by Wilson standards, a well-maintained craftsman on a tree-lined street. Flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds along the walkway. A porch swing swayed slightly in the breeze. "Take your time," Maxwell advised as I sat frozen in the passenger seat. "I'll wait here until you're ready." My legs felt leaden as I approached the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it opened, revealing a woman in her early 60s, her blonde hair now streaked with gray laugh lines, deepening around eyes that were unmistakably like my own. "Heather," my mother whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. Something primitive and wounded inside me recognized her instantly, despite the passage of time. "Mom." We collided in an embrace that collapsed 15 years into nothing, both of us sobbing as we clung to each other. I became aware of another presence, my father standing in the doorway, tears streaming unchecked down his face as he watched the reunion he'd waited so long to witness. "Dad," I managed, extending one arm toward him without releasing my mother. He joined our embrace, his strong arms encircling us both. "My girl," he kept saying. "My beautiful girl." How long we stood there, I couldn't say. Eventually, we moved inside to the living room, a warm space filled with books and photographs. I noticed with a shock that many of the photos were of me: newspaper clippings of my college graduation, a profile piece from a financial magazine, even a distant shot that must have been taken surreptitiously during a public event. "We followed your life as best we could," my father explained, noting my surprise. From a distance, it was all Richard would allow. Over cups of tea that grew cold as we talked, my parents shared their version of the nightmare that had separated us. How Richard had systematically undermined their business while presenting himself as an ally. How he had manufactured evidence of financial improprieties that could have sent my father to prison. how he had presented them with an impossible choice: surrender me to his guardianship or face prosecution that would have destroyed our family completely. "We thought it was temporary," my mother said, her hands twisting in her lap. "A year, maybe 2, while we rebuilt financially. We never imagined he would completely cut us off from you. We tried everything," my father continued. "Legal challenges, supervised visitation requests, even direct appeals to Richard. He countered every move, used his connections to block court hearings, threatened to withdraw his financial support for your education if we persisted. The letters," I said. "I found them. All the ones you sent that he returned." Fresh pain crossed their faces. "We never stopped writing," my mother said, "even when they all came back. It was our way of maintaining some connection, however one-sided." "We have copies," my father added. "Every letter, every card. We kept them for you, hoping someday." The realization that they had never abandoned me, had fought for me, and loved me from afar all these years brought fresh tears. The anger I'd carried for so long, the sense of worthlessness that comes from believing your parents could walk away without looking back, began to dissolve, replaced by grief for the years stolen from us. "Richard is dead," I said finally. But before he died, the truth came out. About the company, about what he did to you. Everything. "We know," my father replied. "Your investigator explained the legal proceedings that are beginning. It's overwhelming." "Wilson Investments was always meant to be ours together," I said. "Yours and Richard's. He stole your half through fraud and coercion." And now, my mother asked. "Now, justice happens, however delayed. The board has placed me in temporary control while investigations proceed. The company assets are frozen, pending legal determination. But Stephen, our lawyer, believes your original ownership stake will be fully restored." My father shook his head in wonder. "Our daughter running the company we built. That's not something I ever imagined, even in the best scenarios. I learned from Richard's playbook," I admitted. "Just not the lessons he intended." That evening stretched into night as we began the delicate process of rebuilding our relationship. They showed me photo albums of their life without me, the small accounting practice my father had built, my mother's work with a local medical clinic, their involvement with community theater and neighborhood associations. A life far removed from the wealth and power of the Wilson name, but rich in other ways. "We made peace with our choices," my father explained. "Knowing you were receiving opportunities we couldn't have provided helped, even if the cost was unbearably high. But we never stopped hoping," my mother added, "that someday when you were old enough to make your own decisions, you might want to find us." "Richard told me you abandoned me," I said, the pain of that belief still raw despite knowing the truth, "that you chose financial freedom over parental responsibility. I spent years hating you for it." Their faces reflected my pain multiplied by their own guilt and helplessness. "Can you forgive us?" my father asked. "For not finding a better way?" The question pierced my heart. "There's nothing to forgive. You sacrificed everything to protect me. I'm the one who needs forgiveness for believing the worst about you for so long." "No," my mother said firmly. "You were a child, Heather. The adult you trusted told you lies you had no way of disproving. The blame lies entirely with Richard." We talked until exhaustion overtook us, making plans to navigate the complex legal and emotional landscape ahead. I would need to return to New York to handle the ongoing investigations and company transitions, but we agreed I would come back to Portland every weekend possible. In the months that followed, healing occurred on multiple fronts. Therapy helped me process the manipulation and gaslighting I'd experienced under Richard's control. The legal team, led by Stephen, methodically untangled the web of fraud Richard had constructed, restoring my father's rightful ownership of Wilson Investments. Megan and I forged an unexpected alliance in the aftermath of her father's death. Her grief was complicated, mourning the father she'd loved while coming to terms with his monstrous actions. "I always knew something was wrong," she confessed during one of our now regular lunches. "But I convinced myself it was normal family dysfunction. It was easier than facing the truth. We were both his victims," I told her, in different ways. The most difficult revelation came during Patricia's exhumation and toxicology testing. Despite Richard's confidence that the evidence would be inconclusive, modern forensic techniques detected arsenic deposits in her hair and nails, confirming long-term poisoning. Megan struggled most with this truth, that her father had slowly murdered her mother when Patricia threatened to expose his crimes. Wilson Investments underwent a fundamental restructuring. My father, though legally reinstated as co-owner, chose not to return to active management, preferring his quieter life in Portland. "The company is yours now, Heather," he told me during a video call 6 months after our reunion. "You've earned it regardless of the circumstances that brought you there." With Brian's support, I implemented sweeping ethical reforms, creating transparency measures and accountability structures that would prevent anyone from repeating Richard's manipulations. The Wilson Foundation redirected its focus toward supporting victims of financial fraud and families separated by circumstances beyond their control. 1 year after Richard's death, my parents moved to New York temporarily to help me settle his estate. The sprawling penthouse where I'd spent my teenage years was sold, the proceeds divided between restitution funds and charitable donations. I purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn with room enough for all of us when they visited, plus space for the future family Brian and I had begun discussing. On a crisp fall evening, we gathered for dinner in my new home, my parents Megan, Brian, Maxwell, and Stephen. As we shared a meal prepared from my mother's family recipes, I realized we had created something precious from the ashes of Richard's destruction, a genuine family built on truth and mutual care, rather than manipulation and fear. A toast, my father proposed, raising his glass. "To second chances. And to freedom," my mother added. "The freedom that comes with truth." I looked around the table at these people who had helped me reconstruct not just my family history, but my understanding of myself. The path to healing wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be entirely, but for the first time since I was 13, I felt whole. "To truth and freedom," I echoed. "And to family the kind we choose and build together." The truth hadn't just set me free. It had given me back my past and opened the door to a future I could shape on my own terms. Richard's legacy of deception had finally been replaced by something authentic and healing, a family rebuilt on love, trust, and forgiveness. I've shared my story today, not just as a cautionary tale about family secrets and betrayal, but as proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when truth finally comes to light. What family secrets have shaped your life? Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my journey resonated with you. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength comes from facing the painful truths we've been avoiding. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find healing in your own life.